All right, what's up, everybody? Josh Madsen checking in here from the Free Hill Life Bunker here in Utah, and back for another Black Level member live. So I'm doing these for all the Black Level members that are watching this, whether you're catching it right now or later on. If you haven't watched one before, I always record them. They're available on the YouTube channel, and you can access them whenever you want. Usually I talk about 45 minutes to an hour. I pick a topic. We're on number 8. I started doing these last year when I kind of started kickstarting the YouTube channel again. And sort of a way for me to connect with you guys as the highest level in the channel membership. So first off, thanks for your membership. Couldn't do this without you. Allows me to, pay the bills for the FHL side of things and have time to do this stuff. So, and I've mostly been focusing on building a lot more content since I closed my brick and mortar shop last spring in Salt Lake City, moved it to my house. That's why I'm calling it the Free Hill Life Bunker, because I'm kind of bunkered out here at the house, which I love, and I've kind of just gotten time to reset up everything here. So glad you're on the channel. I've been putting out a bunch of everything from free videos, just good ski porn stuff, to some how-to videos and whatnot. Black level stuff, I've been trying to do, more fitness stuff. We've started adding in. My wife Kate and I have been doing some of that stuff. And obviously the last Black level live stream, I talked about the TX Pro 2.0 and kind of broke my thoughts down on that. Like I said, I'm not going to be too gear heavy. I don't know. I've said that. I think I don't, when I say that, I'm not going to be gear heavy in terms of, hey, I'm just going to spend a ton of time reviewing all the latest gear, like that's something I'm not. I've tried that in the past, probably made more sense when I was doing like Telemark Skier magazine and whatnot. Made less sense when we had a shop because we're selling like a million things, and I don't know. It's just not really what I want to do on this channel at this point in time. Maybe I'll change my mind. What I am going to do though is if I've got gear that I use, I like talking about that because I feel like that's a great way to connect. And there's such little amounts of gear in terms of new stuff that if you've got it and I've got it and we can go back and forth and you can send me a comment and I can tell you how things are going on my end. I think that that's more valuable. It's valuable to me too. What a cool thing. I get to talk about it on this channel, and then I get to hear what you're thinking as well out there. So anyways, I wanted to talk a little bit about bindings today and kind of give my predictions and opinions on where Telemark bindings are at in 2025. And I was just kind of thinking this on my own because, like I said, there's not a ton of new stuff that comes up constantly, and when new bindings do come up, they usually can be both interesting and also maybe not the best version of where they're going to end up. But that's Telemark. Telemark's usually got a wide variety of iterations of equipment, and if someone gets it right at the beginning, you're stoked. So what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about where bindings are at in 2025. And it's kind of interesting because I think the very first thing to start off, most Black Level members, I think you're probably a little more experienced Telemark skiers for the most part. If you're not, bear with me or hit me up and let me know. I'd actually kind of like to hone in on who's at the Black Level in the YouTube stuff, just so I kind of know who's in there, and would love to get to know you a little bit better. So in 2025, here's the most interesting thing. We still have 2 main platforms in Telemark bindings, and we've got the 75 millimeter stuff, the duckbill, the traditional stuff, and we've got NTN, new Telemark norm. I always say that was the worst marketing choice of all time to call it NTN, because that moniker of new was in 2008. So nearly 20 years ago, we got the new Telemark norm, and it's still new. I guess the letters NTN kind of save it from that, because most people don't know what it means. But so here's what's kind of interesting about where we're at in 75 millimeter and where we're at in NTN. And my philosophy has always been, a binding is how we connect the boot to the ski. I think what's been difficult over the years is I think a lot of manufacturers never really understood as much as I think they should. And this is an opinion piece, obviously, but I don't think most binding manufacturers really, really deeply understood the 75 millimeter user, historically speaking. And why that's important is people do not upgrade their gear quite as often as you would think. And so I think we would have gotten more people upgrading equipment if we deeply understood what kind of bindings they need. With all that said, 75 millimeter bindings are still alive and well, but we're definitely seeing the end, so to speak. And I think what we're seeing is we're seeing the end of it because we're seeing the end of the boots. And I think it's going to get squeezed out until there's just not really an option for that any longer. Hang on one second. I'm going to adjust let's get some camera adjustment here. Hopefully I get this right. I just wanted to, there we go. That might be a little bit better. All right. That's what you get for going live with me. Let's see if we can do one more little adjustment here. Okay. Sorry, that's kind of annoying. And I don't even know if I'm going to edit that out. So 75 millimeter stuff, this is what I think is going to happen is I think there's definitely going to be a sort of a slowing down, if you will, of the ability to make that platform sort of continue. And the boots are really the way to sort of kill it off, so to speak, because what'll happen is if you don't have the boots available, there's not really the need for the binding. I mean, there's that symbiotic relationship, obviously, on the platform side. And so I think really what's going to happen is you're going to see it trickle even more off. Binding wise, in the 75 millimeter realm, you really don't have a lot to choose from any longer. Used market, it's wide open. I mean, you can find used stuff. Obviously, I carry a lot of used parts. And I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of people still servicing old bindings. It's just kind of, I don't know if it's part of the culture. It's definitely, it's just part of what's gone on with Telemark. And I think you're going to see that for a really long time is people keeping old bindings going. But at some point, these boots are just going to wear out. There's not going to be the ability to have that boot any longer. And I think what's really going to kill 75 millimeter completely in sort of non, maybe what we'd call rugged touring. You've probably heard me say that, or Dosty, or some of the people we've talked about it. I would say the T4 boot in Scarpa, that kind of stuff, low two-buckle boot, probably will live on forever. That's my prediction. I think there's a possibility you might be able to change that. I don't know if it's necessary. Like a simple 3-pin with a T4. I think I might have said T2. T4 boot with a 3-pin binding. I think that may live on forever. I do think the T2 Eco probably will go by the wayside at some point, and I think people will start pushing to get that on an NTN platform. It's going to make the binding manufacturers have to really play ball. And what I was saying at the beginning is if you really want to play ball and you want to understand if you want to understand the wide range of people out there, you've got to understand how these bindings are being used and how they feel to all this wide range of people. Now, in our small little world, this is really, really difficult because there's not a lot of R&D dollars going around. It takes years to get one new product, and there's not a lot of competition. So I think that's what's going to happen is, T4 two-buckle boot with a 3-pin. I kind of hope it will survive because I think that's a certain I would call that cross-country rugged touring something in there. Are they making Telemark turns? Possibly. I selfishly would like to see that boot exist because I think if people ever want to get a low cuff boot and a 3-pin binding and slap it on a pair of old skinny skis, I would love to see that exist. And it exists for another user market as well. And I think that'll exist. So 75 millimeter, I think that's probably going to stay there, and 3-pin will probably always exist. But here's what's interesting. Now we're getting down to basically Volet's got Switchback X2. They probably, they've got a 3-pin cable binding. What'll be interesting to see companies like that and companies like 22 Designs, that's pretty much where we're at on the 75 millimeter realm. But they're also competing with themselves in a way because they've got NTN platform stuff as well. Rotofella has the original Free Ride and the Freedom, and their 75 millimeter, for the most part, does not exist. They've got one sort of mashup of the Chili and the Cobra binding that's like a 3-pin cable sort of binding. Not easy to find, not widely distributed. It does exist, but it kind of almost fits that first category I was talking about with like a 3-pin binding with a T4 boot. So they've got their NTN platform that they're really pushing on the Rotofella side. Now, what's interesting about Volet is they've put out this TTS binding, and they've done a couple iterations of it. I haven't skied the latest. I mean, I've skied. What's interesting about that binding is it's, in my opinion, how I categorize TTS is its own thing. It's not NTN because it connects at the real heel, meaning the actual heel of the boot, and not at the second heel. So I actually have 3 categories of bindings that I play by. I've got 75 millimeter. I don't even know how to do my fingers. 75 millimeter. And then I've got NTN, new Telemark norm. And that connects at the, well, thank you, whoever's here. There you go. You've got 75 millimeter, you got TTS, and you've got NTN. Those are the 3 distinct categories of the bindings. And basically, I think what you're looking at with Volet that's interesting is if they're gonna dive deeper into NTN, like it'll be interesting to see if they actually try to do something on the NTN platform. I don't know if they will. The TTS, Volet essentially took that technology from the original TTS, Telemark Tech System, from Mark Langell, and from Moonlight Mountain Gear, which was this obscure Norwegian company that was around for a little bit. All of those parts were manufactured for those very small companies, and that is what essentially they said, hey, we're not going to manufacture those parts anymore. And then I'm sure they probably, hopefully, licensed that technology from those other individuals and made it their own. Now, will they ever make an NTN binding? That's what will be really interesting, because I think if them being a backcountry company, if Volet makes an NTN binding, it's got to be Tecto, like a Lynx or a Majo, and that's what's going to probably what's going to kill their Switchback and their X2 over the course of time. And there's a couple different plays that could happen there. But moving to 22 Designs, it's kind of a similar thing. 22 Designs basically has, in my opinion, the best NTN cage toe binding out there. I'm trying to even think if they might actually have the only, oh, no. What am I saying? Rotofella Freedom, Free Ride, and then you've got 22 Designs Outlaw X. And I think that's, in my opinion, that's sort of the standard at this point for a cage toe binding is Outlaw X. But now that they've got the Bandit, which is the resort version of that, and they've got Lynx, which is the tech toe NTN, it's going to be very, very interesting to see if what happens to the vise and the axle over the course of time. My opinion, best 75 millimeter bindings out there on the market right now are axle and vise. One, they're super burly. They've got a 6-hole mounting pattern versus a 4-hole mounting pattern that the Volet stuff has. And I like that it's got a movable slick pin because I think that's a good way to lead people into the NTM platform if they're not sure about what they like in a binding. So I think that's really important. But kind of going back to my point with this, with 22 Designs, they're going to have to fight themselves in essence, because at some point they're going to start having to say to themselves, is the juice worth the squeeze to make the axle and the vise? The people aren't going away, because there's this battle out there to 75 millimeter, whatever, versus NTN. And I'm all for that. You want to ski what you want to ski. But I think those people didn't have a good quality experience finding the NTN platform binding that makes it feel like there's 75 bindings. So there's this rift. Doesn't need to be there. All the binding company has to do is make a binding that feels like the 75 binding and then say, hey, you just got to upgrade the boots. Let's rock and roll. I think that's what's going to happen there. But they're going to have to fight each other, meaning fight. It's like infighting in terms of 22 is going to have to fight themselves on when to cut that binding loose, meaning axle and vise. Volet is going to, it's essentially have to take a hard look at when they let go of switchback, women's switchback, and the switchback X2 in order to focus on NTM platform. My prediction on that whole thing, and it'll be interesting to look back on this probably a couple of years from now and see how close I was on this, but I don't think Volet has the cojones to go deep on the NTN stuff. And I feel like that's too risky for them to do. Mostly because they didn't have to do a ton of R&D on creating the TTS product, but to go second heel product, I feel is trickier, and they're probably going to have to come up with something like a Lynx or a Majo in order to be in that market. What I could see him doing is acquiring in Wild or something like that. That would make sense to me. Is if they really wanted to get into if they really wanted to get into true NTN tech-toe technology, it wouldn't surprise me if in Wild, formerly M Equipment, the Majo binding, even though it's a French product, it wouldn't surprise me if Volet made an acquisition of some sort to bring that binding in and handle that. That's how I think that, but I think they're more likely to hold out on 75 millimeter because I feel like their binding fits the 75 millimeter binding, like the Switchback and X2 fits really well with the G3 Targa skier, people that were skiing early Rotofella Cobras, even Volet's own hardwire, 3-pin hardwire, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of feel like they're going to be less likely to make big shifts, probably not invest heavy in the actual NTN second heel connection type binding unless they make an acquisition, and they'll probably hold on to that 75 millimeter market share for a lot longer because frankly, it's probably a little bit older demographic and it just kind of fits it kind of fits the trajectory that I think that they're on. 22 designs will most likely just hold out until it doesn't make sense. And NTN crested over the 50% mark years ago. I want to say maybe like 4 years ago. I remember talking to the 22 designs guys. Again, this isn't like set in stone, but I feel like the conversation I had was at least 4 years ago. We spoke about that 50 like the threshold of NTN sales finally crested over, and they ended up selling more NTN bindings than 75. So also the type of people that are, like I said, it's more likely to me Volet will hang on to the 75 millimeter stuff longer. It fits that older demographic, 4-hole mounting pattern. And I feel like people are going to shift over to these NTN bindings from there. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm thinking for bindings, kind of to set the stage for what that's going to look like. I'll mention this. I haven't skied the Bandit yet. 22 Designs new resort binding. I've got some buddies that are mounting them and they're skiing them. I think I've mentioned this maybe in a podcast. I don't know. I mentioned it somewhere. I'm not convinced that the price point is low enough to justify me personally buying a resort only NTN binding. If we're talking like it's in the 300s instead of like the mid 4s, because I think it's only like 50 or 60 bucks less than an Outlaw X. I'm going Outlaw X all day long. I also run a leash. I don't give a shit about the brakes. So, I think retractable brakes, if they come up and in all the way, which I haven't seen up close yet, and I live in a hole, so I'm not watching other videos, whatever. Let me know. If you're skiing the Bandit, you like it, let me know. I'd be stoked to hear about that. But yeah, anyways, Bandit's going to be interesting. I'll probably try to pick up a pair and mount some just so I've got them, because you know me, I like to collect this stuff. I like to have it in the collection and make sure I understand it. I don't think that's going to be a game changer at that price point. I think what's going to be interesting is if they could make, and maybe this is where what happens is maybe the vise and the axle go away and resources are able to come back into the NTN side of things, and maybe you can offset the cost. I just know when you're talking axle to vise, there was a big enough thing there because one had tour mode, one didn't, and you had a resort 75 millimeter binding. I would love to see a cost effective binding that's resort only for Telemark all day, but the price has got to make sense. And if we're going to grow Telemark, just on that note, you got to make gear more affordable, or you've got to create rental gear that's affordable and there's an incentive for a rental shop to carry it. That's what's got to happen. So do I think that we're going to see more bindings like the Bandit? I'm not totally convinced at this point, unless the price point goes way down and it makes sense. Like you're like, hey, I've got this binding. I'm only telemarketing in the resort, and you can get a setup for pretty cheap. That would make sense to me, 100%. Now, one thing I've always said, since we're talking about that resort only binding, one thing I've always said about In Wild, formerly known as the M Equipment, man, I'm surprised that that guy Pierre didn't beat 22 Designs to the sort of to that resort only binding. And I'll tell you why. Had he made had M, or I don't even know what to call them anymore, In Wild, had they made a resort only binding with some of the features that they had, really interesting releasability feature, meaning the springs are perpendicular. There's like a perpendicular spring to the two springs that cause stiffness or softness, great releasability feature, a lot of plastic, not a big fan of that. I can talk about that later. But had he made a cage toe and got away from tech toe and lowered the price and he had beat Bandit to market, I think that would have been a dope move. It would have been really smart. And I think that these guys that understand that, we're still caught in this world of like tech-toe really captured everyone's brain for so long. But people, again, I always say it's like the internet, I think, won on this one because the smallest user group, which is the backcountry tech-toe, what I would call NTN, tech NTN, that won out on the internet. And I think the companies bought into it and they started going, oh, we got to go that direction. And honestly, I think that it's an important piece of the puzzle. And honestly, you can see that the boot company went whoop, and kind of started following that trend. And I'm kind of interested to see how that all plays out in the end, because I think what we're going to probably see, isn't that weird too? You get a brand new resort binding and then you get sort of like what was supposed to be like a backcountry boot. I think there was kind of some misalignment on that. And it's always funny because we don't have like a huge array of products between all the companies. So that's funny to me that it kind of missed each other a little bit on that one. Whatever. They work together, but it's funny in and of itself. So I think what you're going to see is M Equipment. Maybe there's a slight possibility. I don't think they identify themselves as much as like a Volet, as like a backcountry brand. Even though they're a lot more mountaineering and kind of go that direction, they really are, focused like I'm convinced M Equipment really just wants to be an alpine company because they've got an alpine heel. They want you to lock it down. So watch out for those French dudes that are trying to get you to lock your heel in the backcountry. A little sketchy, you got to be careful. Keep that heel free, my friends. That's what I'm saying. Just keep it free. I wouldn't be surprised if they go cage toe at some point. And yeah, whatever. Yeah, thank you for giving me a thumbs up. I mean, I love my French people. Don't get me wrong, but watch out for that heel locking stuff. I'm telling you. All right. So I think that's kind of the sort of predictions and opinions of those are the main players right now. Volet is going to kind of hang in there. I think they're going to be super conservative, and I think they're going to, I don't know. I don't think they're going to do a whole lot. I don't think they're going to innovate a whole lot because really the only innovation that they're showing right now is whatever, the TTS stuff. I just don't see that really happening in Wild. And I live in a bubble too, you guys. Like I'm not watching. I literally don't know what's going on, which is great and beautiful. But also you're watching my channel. So don't watch. I want you, full disclosure, I'm not like a news source anymore because I really don't follow this stuff. There could be some announcement out there. You guys are like, dude, what are you talking about? What about this binding? I'm sort of hearing, maybe I need to put it out there. You be my source of news and you tell me what I should be paying attention to. But, because Bandit's probably the newest thing I'm going to put on here in terms of bindings. What I will say, so that kind of goes over Volet, goes over 22 designs, goes over in Wild, and I've broken it down into 75 millimeter, kind of what I think is going to happen there. With NTN, that's the platform moving forward 100%. But I will say TTS or not real heel connection, I guess, because TTS is technically tech toe with the heel connection. But we're talking about, and I did bring a binding. We're talking about this because everyone always yells at me, Madsen, why don't you talk about the Bishop binding? Why don't you talk about the Bishop binding? This is why I don't talk about the Bishop binding, because it's this effing big and it's a real pain in the ass. No, I mean, literally, that's kind of why I don't talk about it is, I mean, I feel like I'm weightlifting going like this. It's just a massive hunk of metal. Okay. But again, just to talk about this, this is not NTN in the definition of NTN. Now it uses an NTN boot, but it's not technically like an NTN binding. And I mean, that is kind of what's cool about this one. Is technically you can get a 75 millimeter toe for it, ski the binding, and then change the toe and essentially create a NTN binding without having to get rid of the back part. So that's a cool feature. The step-in feature I think is cool. Anybody who listens, and this is kind of part of the problem, is I've put out so many podcasts and content over the course of my existence around Telemark that if you only hear like one thing, and you might not, you got to kind of piece it all together. But I'm not anti this binding, and it's not that it doesn't ski okay. I'm actually probably going to mount these on something and revisit the old Bishop binding just for fun. But I mean, I just think that second heel connection, which would happen more around here, it's more compact on the ski, and I just think, I personally think that that's the connection that makes most sense. I really just don't think we should have bindings that, from an engineering perspective, and that's what everyone's always like, why don't you talk about this binding? Why? And it, quite honestly, to me, it's just, I think I can accomplish the same skiing and the sensation that I want with something that's that big on my ski, and I don't need a real heel connection, which is why they made it that way, because the engineering they touted was like a true like an NTN connection, like an Outlaw X, was not correct. The geometry wasn't going to create the feeling. And look, I'm not a math guy, and I'm not smart enough to know anything about that. All I know is, does it feel the way that I need it to feel as a Telemark skier to get down the mountain the way that I want to and make the adjustments that I need to? That's what I'm all about. And frankly, I think that's what most people are about when it comes to Telemark. And there's all these gear nerds out there, and great, you're like, I'm totally the guy that like didn't even make it through trig and geometry in high school. But I'll tell you, the thing about Telemark is it's the feeling. And going back to the very first thing I said at the beginning of this live is, I don't think that the binding engineers are paying enough attention to the wide variety of the feelings that are going on and talking to people. Most people, when you talk about them, if you ask them about their bindings, especially new bindings, they're going to say something along the lines of, I don't know, it's too stiff, or like, I can't flex the way I want to. Underneath, there's some geometry and mathematics, but understanding why the feelings are the way they are, that's what they need to take and then put their smart brains together and come up with that. I've always said the binding company that's going to kick some ass in the future is going to be the company that starts understanding the wide variety of people. And especially because we've got a lot of people in the marketplace that are like my age and older still. And guess what? They don't like really active bindings like Bishops, Outlaw X, Majo, maybe a little bit more. And it's usually the bindings that can get softer on the spring side, but nobody is changing the pivot point, and that's kind of the big thing. So anyways, I wanted to bring up Bishop. I think it's cool, and I support any company that's out there trying to kick ass, but you're here on my channel, and like it or leave my opinions, I love that you're here because you know I'm going to speak the truth, and that's what I am all about. And I personally, like I said, it's not that I don't like the Bishop bindings, I just don't think it should be that big. I don't see the point. I would love to see him, honestly, that would be a bold maneuver, but I actually think he could probably engineer something pretty dope is engineer a second heel version of the Bishop Bomber, which like almost think like like the OG Bishop Bomber, which was like the silver one, and then when the new guy Dave Bombard bought the company, they kind of reissued sort of the titanium version. Man, if you could come up with a second heel connection with that, all day, I think that's dope. All metal, all CNC machined aluminum. That could be super, super cool. But this whole thing about having a binding that's like this big, that like when I put it up to the screen, you can't even see my face. It's too much for me. I don't like it. So I think that kind of takes us through the majority of these bindings, you know. Like I said, you got the outliers like Bishop, which I think they've actually done. I've had a lot of consultation calls this year, and I was going to say they've done a good job on the marketing, because somewhere people are seeing this and they're like, what about the Bishop? What about the BMF or BMFR? So whatever they're doing, kudos, good marketing. They probably don't want to have people end up at me is the end user point of that marketing campaign, because I may or may not direct them in that direction. But you know, it really depends on what they're looking for. And I'm definitely someone, if you should be on 75 millimeter because of your style and your background, 100%. I'll tell you to go buy a 75 millimeter binding. I'm never going to blow smoke up your ass and be like, hey, go get an NTN binding, just because. I mean, I sell used gear now, but not that much. So there's no reason. And even when I owned a shop, a brick and mortar, I never sent people to NTN unless it was a good fit. And that's, you know, that's why I wish we kind of need to kill one off in order to have the resources for the other, I think. But again, you need to understand how to catch all those people before you jump ship from 75. I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes sense what I'm saying with that, because there's no reason we can't have one way to fasten our boots to the skis, but you got to be able to capture all the types of people that are existing telemarketers. And honestly, I actually think some of those people that want a more neutral binding, that binding I think will actually serve beginner skiers better in the future. And I think for a long time, you know, even I thought, oh, well, you want like NTN's great because it's so stiff and laterally stiff. That'll be great for beginners. But especially for all of you that are watching this, like within the next couple days, if you go back and watch that Black Level, no, actually it was the podcast I did to kickstart the season with Craig Dostie. We were talking about the sole flex of boots. And I think the sole flex in boots and the flexibility of the bindings, I honestly think, and this is me coming from being a young telemarketer, starting at age 14 in the early 90s and being here now, and Craig said something that was so poignant where he's like, I think he said something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing, people have like lost the ability, they don't even know what they're missing because we don't even have something for them to feel what it was once like. And I think this could easily get played off with a lot of people in terms of like, well, technology's moving forward and you old dudes are just like trying to be nostalgic and you don't want to let go of stuff. And quite honestly, I think it's good to be skeptical and think maybe that's why these guys are saying stuff like that. Or maybe this is actually true. And I think Dostie was making a fantastic point about this, because the more I've kind of gone through my arc of my own telemark journey and skiing so much different gear over the course of the last 30 years, is I think that we're moving away from the ability for people to feel certain aspects of the turn that are so important. It's what makes people fall in love with the turn. And from an athletic standpoint, some people need less in terms of activity and stiffness and lateral stiffness, because it's going to give them sensations that they actually need to enjoy the process. And this is why I was saying earlier with Axel and Vice from 22 Designs, I like the adjustable pivot point, because at least this is one action that one person can take to make simple adjustments to try to tweak how the feeling is. I really think that this is the future of Telemark for the binding company that can somehow understand the wide range of people and needs. And I speak from the heart on this one, because owning a brick and mortar, I would get to meet so many people in one season, and over the course of 9 seasons that I had that shop. It was really, really interesting to get a snapshot of how wide this thing really is, and maybe where the missing pieces are. And I think that it will serve us well as a Telemark world to somehow be able to come up. And I kind of think, I guess as I'm kind of wrapping this up, prediction for the future is I think less is more when it comes to the bindings. Because I really think it's not the bells and whistles. It's the ability to have less stuff going on with the binding so you can feel what's going on. And I think that simplicity, both from a cost standpoint and from a feeling standpoint, is going to be crucial to us moving forward and having something pretty good. Man, I love that you guys get on here and let me just rant at the. Oh man, that is so funny. No, it's really cool. I love being on here. I love being able to talk. And I was trying to see who all is on here. Let's see. Type in. Let me know who's here. I was gonna say hello, but I think I got one person on the live, so but I guess just to wrap up, I think, oh yeah, what's up, dude? That's awesome. Good to see you, man. Happy you're here too. Yeah, I think I honestly think that the exciting part about the bindings for 2025, we have everything that we possibly could want in terms of moving forward. And I think with the NTN stuff, I didn't touch too much on whether to choose Tecto NTN or Outlaw. I guess maybe I'll touch on that real quick, because that's probably a key factor. Here's me. Generally speaking, if I'm going to go hiking, I take a Tecto binding because I've got it, and I use links from 22. The reason I use links, it's less parts. It's not going to break as easy. If it breaks, I feel a little bit less like it's going to be catastrophic. I do think the Majo is a cool binding. I think it's a ton of plastic. I'm a big dude. If it blows up, it's probably going to really blow up to the point where I might be having to strap my foot to the ski. Not as big of a fan of that. If I had to do a really long, crazy tour, like if you're watching the podcast with Mike Hatrip this past week, talked about the Hout route. I have not done that, but if I were to do something like that, where it's really long, I need lots of backups, sort of the 2 is 1, 1 is none sort of mentality, I'd go TTS. I'd probably mod, maybe not the Volet version, but I might even go like OG version. And that's kind of its own. I could kind of go deep into that setup as well. But something that's like, if it breaks, I can get down. And if I'm in the middle of nowhere like the Alps, I've got a solution to the problem. But most days I go skiing. I'm taking Outlaw X. I go ski, click in, click out. I run a leash. I don't run brakes ever. It's just not my thing. Also, I make leashes, so I have a ton of leashes. Just never been a fan of the brakes. The only time I will use brakes is if I go Rotofella free ride, which I've got on a couple setups, and I like the brakes. I think those are probably the best step in brake, except that they don't retract inward, which I think is what they're trying to accomplish on the Bandit. But that's awesome. We're moving forward on that whole thing. And I think we're in good position. It'll be interesting to see. I don't think 75 millimeter is going to disappear anytime soon. Like I said, I'm selling used parts to people every single day for bindings that haven't been manufactured for over a decade, and some that are even further back. And what that shows me is, why aren't people moving to this new stuff that we talked about? I think it goes back to what I said. I don't think they've got the right feeling. Yeah, could they be poor and they don't want to buy something? Sure, but that's not everybody. And people like to stick with what they know. So if you can give them something that they kind of know in a new version, I think they'll bite it. They'll bite on it. So that's my predictions, opinions, and kind of just shooting the shit on Telemark bindings for 2025. I would love to hear any additional questions that you have. Feel free to leave them in the comments, afterwards if you're not catching this live. Justin from PA, much love, dude. Glad you're on here. Thanks for supporting the channel. Drink a Yingling for me and enjoy Midwest Telly Fest, and hopefully it'll be good times up there. So I'll be back next. Here, I'll even look at the date. Let's see. We got first Tuesday of March is going to be March 4th. It's going to be right after World Telemark Day, which is on Saturday, March 1st. And you can catch me back here for another Black Level live stream. And I'm always up for topics. If you want to hit me up and tell me anything about what you would like to see, that would be awesome. And until next time, spread Telemark always, my friends. Peace and love. See you later.